Jai Sri Ram, welcome to Bharat Marg.
Okay.
Welcome Vinay Ji. Thanks for being here. And now the subject is very interesting. Foreign students exploited in Canada for cheap labor. That's what we are going to discuss about. Vinay Ji, many people come here with a dream to Canada, right?
Mhm.
They can land here. There's a road of gold and all those things and all, right? And what happens at the end? It's a very interesting story. But friends, if you are here, please make sure to like the video, comment, and share. And also, if you are here for the first time, do subscribe the channel Bharat Marg if you didn't already, and press the notification button to stay connected so that whenever we go live, you can come and comment and become the part of the conversation. Okay, that's what it is all about. And again, welcome to the political analyst from Toronto. Uh, Vinay Ji, thanks for coming to Bharat Marg again. And foreign students exploited in Canada for cheap labor. What do you say? This is
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you've watched a show just recently by CBC. It was an investigative show that was exposed how foreign students are coming into Canada, not only for
little bit volume.
education, but also for labor, because their ultimate goal is to kind of somehow work around the system and immigrate to Canada, settle in Canada, and hopefully bring their folks from back home to Canada and set up their own family, livelihood, and all that stuff. So that's their intent. And the exploitation is not just at the labor stage. It begins with the whole immigration process. Coming in as a student is not easy. You have to go through a whole bunch of process and whatever, and then there are touts. When I say touts, agents who actually do this for people. For they do this for a living, and they engage these kids back home, whether it's in India, Pakistan, or Asian countries, or even Eastern Europe, right? So they are all very eager to come to Canada, and these touts are always looking around for such vulnerable students, vulnerable families, vulnerable parents, and they go and tell them, yeah, we'll do the immigration papers. I mean, the sorry, student visa papers, and they bring them here, and then they put them in colleges that have no domestic student, 100% foreign students, and the parents can only afford so much. So when they bring in these people, the students, the parents will probably give them enough money to cover them for 1 or 2 semesters, but cost of
That itself
living,
is a
food,
lot.
everything. Now guess what the students have to do? They have to work. They have to work to make a living, not only to make a living, but also pay their tuition fees, to also kind of dress up well, kind of, all that stuff, right? Especially for
Peer
women, like,
pressure.
makeup and all that good stuff. Now, the issue is, how do they work? This is where the cheap labor comes in. So these kids come in, and now many of them do not have the papers to work in Canada. Okay. So let's look at both situations. All right. So one is where the paperwork is a huge bureaucratic political process where you got to go jump through hoops to get your paperwork done so that you can actually work in Canada. And the government allows 20 hours, but I
Now
believe
they have
as
extended it.
recently they increased that, right? So now let's look at both scenarios. One is with paper or one is without paper. So let's do the without paper first. There are a lot of these companies that are like they need laborers, okay, and like telemarketing, for example, and then restaurants, and these are people who will bring in these students, after hours or whatever. And students now, you know what? their focus is now becomes so much, their burden is so much on themselves that they even give up some of their school times and they start working in these jobs. They do, like for example, in an Indian restaurant, all they're doing is fry samosas, and they get $5, $6 per hour, and a free food, and that's it. What's the minimum wage here? It's $15. So you see the exploitation. And then even in these factories, they kind of exploit them and put them on labor jobs. They have no WSIB, that is workplace safety insurance. They are not allowed to work, and they don't have the papers, and they're not given proper protection, nothing. So these kids are just given cash at the end of the day. You work for 10 hours, they make about $50 a day, or not even, and then they go away. So this is exploitation, and the government is, I don't know what they're doing about it, and maybe they're aware, maybe they're not, I'm not sure. Now let's look at the second scenario. The
Mhm.
second scenario is they have to go through a whole bunch of paperwork to get their work permit to work in this country. So they have to go stand in these lines and Service Canada, and get their work permits, and get their work permits. But then the exploitation doesn't stop there. The exploitation
Mhm.
continues, because these kids have the ability, because they could be computer guys, they could be artists, they could be engineers in the making, they could
Mhm.
be whatever they're doing, any different courses, right?
Mhm.
But the normal pay rate for a Canadian, with that kind of experience that they bring from back home, is about, let's say, about $25 to $30, right, per hour. But here these kids are given $15, because legally they have to give them $15 because they have the papers to work here, and that's about it. And this is cheap labor. This is
And if
exploitation.
they go more than the time, then they get the less than minimum wage.
Yeah, they're allowed. They can, because you know what, exploitation doesn't stop at just giving you your minimum wage. It also
And
exploitation starts by exploiting them to work more hours.
absolutely. Vinay ji, I just want the viewers to know. Vinay ji has done a great video with Seema Hindustani ji on how the grooming happens in the student community for sexual work, for prostitutions, and those kind of things. And they don't call it as prostitution. They call some goody names and all those things and all grooming, whatnot
Escort.
and all. Vinay ji has done a fantastic video in Bharat Mark. I want you to see that is also part of the how the students lose their character for their life and become nothing but a sex slave. You have to watch that video and put it along with that. Thank you, Vinay ji and Seema Hindustani ji, for doing that. And please go ahead, Vinay ji.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up as well, because the exploitation of cheap labor doesn't stop right in the legitimate companies as well. Just legitimate companies, like I'm talking about, like restaurants or industries or factories or whatever, right? There are the illegitimate industries, like for example, sex workers,
Mhm.
and these kids coming in as students, they're like 18, 19, 20-year old, right?
No,
They're
not knowing good from
absolutely
bad.
innocent. They have no background. Their intention is to just come here, study, and do something nice for their family, because they want to progress well, but they are in a financial bind. That is the biggest problem. So they can only work, maybe some companies will say, okay, you have a work permit, I can only allow you 20 hours per week. Okay, so 20 hours, you come in on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you do 4 hours on Friday, and remaining 8 plus 8 on Saturday and Sunday, and that's it, your 20 hours is done. And then what? 20 hours is not going to give them $300, right, a week. That's not going to give them enough money to sustain, because they
That's
have to pay
in
their
today's
fees.
inflation, you cannot even buy food with it.
You can't buy food, you got to pay rent. Exactly. So with given that, what do they do on Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night? You have got 7 nights, right? 7 nights. What do? They go and are available for sex trade. I mean, like, this is what's happening here, and even the sex trade, they're not getting their fair value for that, and people are exploiting them. And there are a lot of touts in everything, right? So there are touts hanging around colleges, and they're looking at these vulnerable girls, walking
And
around
boys
single,
too.
maybe. Yeah,
Boys
and
are
boys
high.
too, maybe
Yeah,
boys too.
in Western countries today, boys are high demand.
Absolutely. So that this is what's going on, and they exploit them, and they, the client, whoever is willing to pay quite a bit of money, but most of it goes to the pimp. That's what I gotta say. Unfortunately, that's what's happening. So this is crazy what's happening. The government, I'm not sure what they're doing. And the other thing that I would like to connect, if you would permit me to do so, again, this may be a little controversial. I don't want people knocking on my door, but I'll just tell you this: the government also brings a lot of refugees into this country.
Oh, absolutely. And
Okay,
more than anything, the cheap labor affects the Canadian citizens too. Like,
exactly.
see
Because you
the
know what, they will not hire, they would rather hire a person for $5 an hour than
exactly.
pay
See
somebody
what
15 to $20.
Girinathan ji says. It makes a lot of sense. Even in India, he says we face similar problem with Bangladeshi Rohingya Muslims and Northeast. Absolutely, you are right. But here we are talking about upper middle class families who come here, good family people becoming a sex slave. Good family people come here and breaking the back and doing the many time odd jobs. If they break their back, they don't have insurance or anything. They have to just check out. Isn't it true,
Right.
Vinay ji?
Absolutely, absolutely. uh, this is the thing, right? Like, most of the people who come here are either low middle class or upper middle class, or somewhere in that range.
Absolutely. One
And they
second, hold
come.
on. 1 second, hold on, Vinayji. I will come to the refugee issue you started. Okay, I'll come there in a minute. I just want to show the people what the dailies are putting together here so that they are aware of. See, yeah, see do you see this? Some international students have to take tens of thousands of dollars in debt to come to Canada, where they were paid 3 or 4 times of the fees of the domestic student. It is not one time fee. You have to pay 3 4 times those fees. More than $6 billion annually at an average of $25,000 per student have become a key source of revenue for Canadian post-secondary system. Students are also feeling the pinch of the inflation, rent, food, and everything. The same thing what Vinay ji was talking about. See here, foreign students say Canada is exploiting them for cheap labor. Same thing we are talking about. And government sold the permit to extend. See, if you go through these articles, okay, and this is from Global Mail, and you see NDTV had from India had made an article on this too. When they need us, they exploit us. Indian students in Canada, whatever, because money and cheap labor. This is what being said. Vinayji, what do you say? The same thing what you are talking about is being said here.
Exactly. And that's a good caption there. When they needed us, they took us, and they didn't need us, they threw. It's like, they exploited us, basically. That's what the most of the students are saying, because these kids come in, they work because the thing. Okay, here's the background. I got to give you a little bit of background. So when the pandemic hit, okay, up until the pandemic, things were going fantastic here. Okay, it was a great balance here. But right after when the pandemic hit, a lot of companies shut down. A lot of companies started laying off people, and then what happened was, the pandemic slowly kind of started going away, and then sometime beginning of this year, things started opening up. The governments across all the provinces and the federal government started opening up. Now the companies also started opening up because now they were going after new businesses and stuff like that. So now what happened was they started bringing those people who they had laid off back to their companies. But guess what happened? Those guys had moved on. They said no. And then they tried rehiring or hiring some of the new people, and new people were not available in the market because the labor market has become so kind of crazy that it was kind of, I should say, this saturation point was at such a peak that it was almost virtually impossible to find people to work. I mean, people were willing to pay, but they were not able to get the right talent. So now what happens? You have these foreign students. That's a huge kind of repository, I should say, from where you can draw some of these people. But the government was only allowing 20 hours a week. And then the company said, okay, you know what? We will hire these foreign laborers, students mainly, because if you want to hire a foreign laborer, it's a huge process to bring them in through LMIA and blah 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 and work permits and stuff like that. These guys were already available right here. I can hire them today, they can work tomorrow, start working tomorrow. So given that, these guys started approaching these colleges and these universities and stuff like that and said, hey, do you have somebody in software? Do you have somebody? Yeah, I've got a second year guy, I've got a first year student, he's extremely good and blah blah blah. And you bring them in for interview.
Yeah, many of
You
these
do that.
people have work experience
i
when coming here.
personally i personally have interviewed some of these students. Okay. All
They're
right.
good.
Yeah. So I'm a consultant and I do this for a living. So I personally have interviewed some of these students and they've got good talent, some of them. So you
Yes.
interview about 5 or 6 students and you pick one of them and say, okay, you come on in. But then guess what happens? Some of these companies are so kind of caught up in their own web, right? Say they kind of bring in these students. They say, okay, we'll offer you $15 an hour. The student is extremely happy because all this while he was working in an illegitimate job for $5 an hour. Now he's got a $15 an hour job as a software designer, right? Why wouldn't he take it? He will take it. And then they will say, okay, you know what? You can work for 20 hours, but after 20 hours, because your government doesn't allow you to pay, we'll have to cut down your salary. Kid will say, yeah, sure, why not? So this is what's going on because the inflation, the cost of renting, and the cost of tuition has gone up so much for international students, especially, that it's unbelievable. They just cannot survive in this country without having a second, third, fourth income.
Your last word, we are almost approaching the end. Vinay Ji, I just want you to say how it is affecting a normal Canadian citizen. They may be thinking, oh, they are getting exploited. What is it for me? Are the refugee issues what you started? I cut it off in the middle. If you can cover it minute and off quickly on
Yeah,
those
I'll
things.
cover the refugee issue quickly. Refugees are also coming in from various countries, Syria and Afghanistan and so many other countries, right? Some of them come with some amount of professionalism, some amount of education and stuff like that. But these kids who come, they also bring in talent, okay? And they are also given, I mean, they're also eligible to work here because now they can work full time, 40 hours or more. But why is the government doing it? What is the agenda behind bringing refugees? Can I say it is for cheap labor? Will I be reprimanded? Will somebody start knocking on my door if I say, "Oh,
How
the
come it is a
refugees"?
cheap labor? They have to be paid minimum wages, isn't it? At least.
No, no, because it's you don't have Canadian experience.
Okay, that's
Unless you have a Canadian experience, nobody's going to pay. I went through it as well. I mean, I'm sure you went through it as well.
I flipped a burger in India. Oh, you don't have Canadian experience. You never flipped the burger in Canada.
There you go. So, but some of them come with the talent, right? So this is the thing. So why is government bringing these guys in truckloads? Is there an agenda, hidden agenda, because it's cheap labor? So, anyways, bottom line, I just want to leave it at that. And then coming back to your other question, how is it going to affect the locals? It is going to affect the locals because jobs, whether it is cheap labor or whatever labor, jobs are getting taken away from the true Canadians.
Right.
Okay. People who are technically deserve to be $25 per hour or deserve to be paid $30 an hour are not being hired because they're hiring either these cheap students or they're hiring the the refugees. Who knows? So that's
Absolutely.
my border. That's my final words.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Vinay Ji, for coming and giving a great, fantastic thing on how the foreign students are going through the struggle here and how the government and the country are exploiting them and how it is affecting the people, common citizens here in Canada. Yeah, you just put it together very nicely. Thank you very much for it. Appreciate it very highly. Okay. Thank you again
Thank
for
you,
coming,
Ji.
Bharat Mar. Jai Sri
Correct.
Ram. Jai Sri Ram.